This episode is brought to you by the Sterling Soap Company. Christmas will be here before you know it. And you know what would make a great stocking stuffer for everybody in your family? Sterling Soap. From bar soap to shave soap, beard balm to lip balm, aftershaves and lotions, Sterling Soap has something for everyone on your list. Check out their seasonal soaps that will complement the scents of your home this holiday season. And they're more than just soap. They also have a full line of coffee straight from the Sterling Roastery. Find their full line of products at sterlingsoapcompany.com.
What's up, sports history fan? Dana Augusta here of the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast. Ever wish you can get behind-the-scenes access to the Hockey Hall of Fame and dive into the untold stories that shaped the game? Then you need to check out Hockey Hall of Fame True Stories Part 2 by Eric Zweig. Eric's latest book is packed with wild, unexpected tales from epic rivalries and game-changing moments to quirky incidents like polo injuries and snowblower mishaps. Eric Zweig's impeccable research and passion for the sport of hockey will whisk you through the NHL's early years, the origins of the Three Stars tradition, and how hockey first hit the airwaves. Plus, you get fresh takes on legends like Wayne Gretzky, Bobby Hall, and Joe Sakic. Hockey Hall of Fame True Stories 2 is available now wherever you get your books. Grab your copy and get ready to dive deep into the heart of the game.
This is Basketball History 101 with Rick Loayza.
Welcome back to Award-winning Basketball History 101, part of the Sports History Network. I'm your host, Rick Loayza, and this is the podcast we bring to life some of the forgotten stories from basketball history. We are bringing old school basketball to a new school audience. And today we bring you a very special interview with author Bob Kuska. This is a two-part interview where we discuss his new book, Balls of Confusion, Pro Basketball Goes to War, 1965 to 1970. And it covers the first 5 years of the ABA as they attempted to take on the NBA. So with no further ado, let's go right into our interview. All right, well, here we are with Basketball History 101, with Rick Loayza, and I have with me today Bob Kuska, the author of Balls of Confusion, Pro Basketball Goes to War, 1965 to 1970. And Bob, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. I really appreciate you coming on.
It's a pleasure to be here, Rick. Can I ask, who's your audience? I mean, how long you've been doing it? Tell me a little bit about the blog. I found your blog from my friend in Sacramento. It sent it to me a few years ago, and I thought, yeah, let's just get started this way. So I'm this is right up my alley, and I'm real happy to do it.
Sure. Well, I've been doing the podcast for a little over 4 years now, and it kind of started as it's something I've sort of had in the back of my mind for years, but with kind of but it really came to start kind of as a pandemic project. I suddenly found myself with all this free time, so I got started, and I've been able to keep it going. We've got something around 225, 230 episodes out there, and I'm just looking at different stories just from anywhere in basketball history. So I've got stories that go back to the evolution of the dribble, the evolution of the jump shot, kind of the teams from the barnstorming days, when college basketball was king, like in the 1940s, how the NBA started. I've got a few stories about the ABA and the NBA, and I have a few kind of profiles. So I look at one particular player and just kind of walk through that career and their impact, and just try to, one of my goals is to kind of remind the audience and people who are interested in basketball history of some of these older players that we tend to forget about. But for example, I had one story I did was like on a guy named Bob Davies, who played in the late 40s and early 50s. And at the time in the early NBA for I can't remember what it was, the 10th anniversary or 20th anniversary of the league, he was named one of the league's all-time top 10 players. And then you fast forward into like the 80s or 90s, and he's not even the top 50 anymore. I'm like, how does a guy go from top 10 to not even being included in the top 50? And I was like,
yeah, it's generational. Did you know somebody somebody did a biography of Davies? I think he lives in Sacramento, actually. I'm not sure if he's still alive, but I know that he did
It might be. It might be. I might have that because I have a biography of Bob Davies. That's where I did most of my research.
Yeah.
It might be the same. It might be the same one you're talking about. So that's what I'm trying to do is just doing some profiles on guys. Guys that we shouldn't forget. It's like, hey, this guy was great in his era, and he deserves to still be in the conversation of all time greats. Again, just moments in history that had a big impact, whether it's an impact on the court, like guys that triggered a rule change, like Chamberlain getting the lane widened, that had an impact, and just things like that. So I'm just looking for stories too.
I wrote the first book about the origins of black basketball, the first detailed book.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I did that a while ago. So I published, that was the first book that I did, and I then moved on. I wrote, actually, again, probably the first book on small college basketball. So I used West Virginia to tell that story. It used to be that if you wanted to watch basketball, towns would come out and support the local team. And so I kind of looked at what happens when you have these remote towns and cities that suddenly are all plugged in on, have cable television, and how it's different. So it was a then and now book as well. So the reason I mention all that, I'm not really a stats guy. I'm more of a sociologist. It's the sociology of the game that fascinates me.
Is that kind of more? Is that your training, kind of your background? Is that why you tend to go that way?
Yeah, I'm a science writer. So I wrote for the National Institutes of Health for years, and they wouldn't allow me to freelance about health, medicine, politics, anything like that. So I'd been a basketball player as a kid growing up. I was just an avid basketball guy. So I just started doing freelancing on sports. And what happened was I was going to do a story for a local paper in Washington. At the time, I was living in Washington, D.C. And I was going to do like an all-playground, contemporary playground team. And my first source I talked to said, hey, I don't know anything about the players today, but Washington has a whole history, a basketball history. I went to high school with Elgin Baylor. So 3 hours later in that conversation, I said, hey, look, there's a whole history here. Are you involved in science at all, or? No.
My degree was in communication. I work as a project manager now for a tech company.
So I was the first science writer for the Human Genome Project.
Oh, wow.
Who did all the mapping of the DNA. So I kind of took so based on that conversation, I took the same approach. I would go down to the Library of Congress, and I'd just get old microfilm reels. And anytime I saw Negro basketball mentioned, it was...
Yeah.
And I just Xeroxed all of it. So I've still got all the files here. And so, although Arthur Ashe and other people had done overviews of the origins of black basketball, I actually went in and took a detailed look. And this is the first one anybody had ever done.
Now, what's that one called?
It's called Hot Potato. What I find, for example, you mentioned the jump shot, the first jump shot. I think it's impossible to figure out who shot the first jump shot.
Oh, yeah.
For me, the issue is really who popularized the jump shot. And it's the same with black basketball. What a lot of people have tried to do is they try to go back, who was the first pro black player? Well, that's impossible to figure out. So I looked at how was black basketball popularized? And it was popularized, just lucky for me, in Washington, D.C. and New York. That's where it all started. And so that's what the book documents.
Yeah, the line I used, because I did a story on the jump shot, and I kind of ended up focusing on Hank Lucetti from Stanford. He played...
It was a one-hander.
He was the first, I'm talking about popularizing it. So he's playing at Stanford. He's, at the time, scoring like a scorching 15 points a game. Goes to New York City, plays in Madison Square Garden, and with this funky new shot, and just took Madison Square Garden by storm. And, within the next couple of years, you started seeing a lot of the New York teams New York colleges were starting to then use the one-handed jump shot. But then there's a line I say in the podcast. I'm like, trying to figure out who actually shot the first one-handed shot would be like trying to figure out who's the first guy that discovered fire. You're not going to find him.
Yeah, and the thing is, if you go back and you look at all of the basketball coaching books from back that era. The idea was, it's completely different than today, and the idea was that you wanted to have, so your center was sort of was the playmaker.
Mm-hmm.
And so you wanted to have forwards cut to the basket, and you wanted to run your offense so that you got the highest percentage shot. And the idea was, so they called it scientific basketball. And the idea was that if you followed these diagrams, and you got the highest percentage shot, you would win. I mean, that's what basketball is all about. So when you got these guys like Lucetti who were shooting these one-handed shots, the coaches were like, "Oh my goodness, we're not doing that. That's not scientific."
Yeah.
So you had, I mean, it was supposed to be. So they had guards who were truly guards, but because they were back on defense, they were told that the most accurate way to shoot was to have both feet set and shoot from either underhand or use a two-handed shot. So there are a variety of different ways of doing it, but that was the only way. That was the only thing that was acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
So that it just wasn't going to happen. So you're absolutely right about Lucetti. I talked to a player from the 1930s who was like, "Oh yeah, Lucetti came through," and it was like, "Oh my goodness." So we started doing the playground, but their coaches weren't going to let them do it. Anyway, I can babble on, but really, I tell you, the most fascinating thing, if you can ever get there, is basketball was a regional game. You had different styles within the different regions of the country.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened in World War II is it all came together. It became a mixing bowl. And that's really where the modern game began.
I like that. And I believe it, right, because you had guys from all over suddenly playing on these military leagues and what have you. And that's great.
Yeah, so I did an interview with this local DC coach. If you know DC basketball, Morgan Wooten, who coached at DeMatha, and all that. So this was his buddy named Joe Gallagher, and Gallagher was telling me he coaches at St. John's, and so Gallagher was telling me, I was in the military, and all of a sudden we're playing in Hawaii against these California guys, and they're all shooting jump shots. I'm like, where did this come from?
Yeah.
So one of the fascinating things is not so much in Tennessee, but in West Virginia, Kentucky, and so on. Basketball is also a game. So remember the scientific thing that I was talking about, and you had that. I mean, it grew out, but the game kind of grew up through the YMCA's and that whole physical culture. But in places like West Virginia, where you didn't really have the right facilities, there are incredible stories about how the game evolved. I mean, there's a guy named Cam Henderson who's from West Virginia, who within West Virginia lore is the originator of the zone defense and the fast break.
Oh wow!
Yeah. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. However, I could rattle on and spout off the whole story. I mean, it's fascinating, but it's all about not having the right facilities. So kind of desperate times lead for desperate strategy.
Yeah.
And that's what's innovated the game. I mean, it's the same thing in the playground where you got kids, low income, inner city kids who had to play. They didn't have 5-star coaches telling them how to play the game. They just improvised.
Right.
And that's where the improvisation came, and they just eventually got so good that they overtook the sport. Yeah. So, anyway.
All right, well, how about we go ahead and get started with Balls of Confusion. And I found interesting that just your title, Balls of Confusion, and...
let me just tell you, too, Balls of Confusion... it riffs off an old Temptation song from 1970. It's called "Ball of Confusion."
Okay.
So I've kind of borrowed that. So balls is actually so the cover of the book is the NBA ball, Walter Kennedy signed ball, and the ABA ball. So both leagues were truly confused about how to fight this war. So that's what it's about. And if you go back and you look at the lyric of the songs and sort of the social upheaval at the time, it really applied well to what was going on in the war between the two leagues, the National Basketball Association, the established league, and the upstart American Basketball Association. And this all started in the mid-'60s.
Yeah. No, my understanding of when the ABA became a thing, that at first the NBA didn't really feel that threatened by it. They thought that, this league will probably be gone in a year, and didn't give them a lot of serious thought, at least not at first. Is that fairly accurate?
Yeah, pretty much. The NBA was kind of vulnerable at the time because there wasn't a second league. There was a second league in football, the American Football League, which was just about to merge with the National Football League. There obviously was a second league in Major League Baseball. And what was happening is that those were the two major sports, and their success was pretty much out of the bag and very expensive for sports entrepreneurs or people of that mindset to get into. Whereas the NBA was still kind of struggling, though it had survived through the 50s, the end of the 40s and into the 50s and 60s. But it was still kind of affordable for anybody who wanted to get into pro sports. And so, the NBA owners, or the ones who actually started the league, kind of sort of nickel and dime sports culture, they thought it was kind of foolhardy to get into this godforsaken business. And they had kind of history on their side. There had been the old American Basketball League, which popped up at the start of the 60s, which didn't make it even 2 seasons. And so they figured that the ABA would also go down the drain too. But the reason that didn't happen, at least to begin with, is because the ABA, they were able to get some wealthy people, and if you get wealthy investors who are willing to take the initial startup losses with the idea that down the road you'll be able to either establish the league or merge into the existing league and vastly increase the value of your franchises, it's worth the effort.
Yeah, that's right. And when I'm looking at the dates, the NBA was only 20 years old, which I'm looking at that going, that's still a relatively young league to now see a challenging league come in and try to, because the ABA was not trying to be like a minor league to the NBA. They were coming in and they wanted to go right after the NBA and be considered, at the very least, the other major basketball league.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about this book, and one thing I should actually make clear, there are lots of things that are interesting about this book, but one of them is that nobody's ever really taken a look at this war from the perspective of the NBA and the ABA, to tell the story of both sides. I mean, there have been books that document the history of the ABA, for example, Terry Pluto's Loose Balls. But what Balls of Confusion does, and that's the reason it's plural, Balls of Confusion, is it shows just how confused both leagues were on how to fight this war. Mm-hmm. But what's also unique about this book, and really getting back to your question, is that what exists about the ABA and its story has generally been told through what's called the West Coast group. The ABA, if you go back and look at the history of the origins of the league, it's a union of an entrepreneurial group in New York and an equally entrepreneurial group in Los Angeles. And so the West Coast and the East Coast group come together to form this American Basketball Association. And the ABA survived for 9 seasons. And after the ABA dissolved/merged into the NBA, the history of the league was told through that West Coast group. The East Coast group has never really ever told its story. And what Balls of Confusion does is it merges the two, and it shows sort of the interplay and actually sort of the competition between those two groups. So to kind of get at your question, the East Coast group, they were in it market players. That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to start this league and serve as the PR company to tout these players. Whereas the West Coast group, they wanted, because they couldn't afford to get into the NFL or Major League Baseball, they wanted to get into pro basketball on the cheap, and they recognized at that time that because of revolution in aviation, it was now possible to have these truly national leagues from East Coast to the West Coast, and they knew that the NBA would be expanding, and it already had come to Los Angeles and San Francisco by the early 60s, but they knew that the NBA would be expanding to other Western cities to expand its geographic reach. And so what they wanted to do, the West Coast guys, is get into those West Coast cities so that would help them leverage a merger with the NBA, in which their franchises, which they would have purchased for maybe $5,000 a pop, would be worth millions. So it was sort of a clever attempt to make some money and get into the game.
Now, in terms of a war between the two leagues and going after, like any other business, kind of limited resources, you're looking for fans, you're looking for players, you're looking to sell tickets. What were some of the strategies that the ABA used to try to really go after the NBA, or at least establish themselves?
Yeah, no, Rick, you mentioned how the NBA was about 20 years old at that time, and there was kind of this feeling that pro basketball was kind of boring. That the NBA, they had some stars and it was fun, but it was a center-dominated league. And obviously watching Wilt Chamberlain play was incredible for a regular-sized fan. Those Boston teams with Bill Russell, Bob Kuska, and so on, those fast-breaking teams, they were fun to watch. But it just wasn't, the NBA just wasn't really a elegant association, kind of put it that way. And so the ABA, the East Coast group and the West Coast group, they were able to bring in the NBA's former Mr. Basketball, George Mikan, to be the commissioner. And Mikan was of the opinion that the game really needed to be revitalized. And so were other people. On the East Coast group, they were trying to market these players, so they wanted to put some flash into it. In fact, their early tagline was the American Basketball Association is the lively league. And so they were able to put in, kind of brainstorm and say, we should implement the three-point line, for example. And what the value of that is, it becomes like the home run. What the home run is in baseball, we have the home run, the three-point shot in basketball. And what it will also do is bring in the regular-sized player, so that he has a place in the game, because again, the game was dominated by these Wilt Chamberlains and so on at that time. So they had that innovation. They kind of mucked around a little bit with the dimensions of the court and the length of the 3-point shot. The obvious thing is they livened up the basketball with the red, white, and blue ball, which really, based on my research, it all goes back to the East Coast group and the PR group, which was trying to play off of the whole American concept. So yeah, they were doing everything they could to turn it into a fun league.
Yeah, and I think in regards to the red, white, and blue ball, and I know others have said this that were part of the ABA, that it just looked prettier on television to see a spinning multicolored ball. It just looked nicer on your TV.
It looked nicer on TV, but speaking, showing my age, it was actually kind of disorienting. It was sort of like a pinwheel, this rotating thing. But if you talk to players who played in the ABA, they'll swear by it as helping them. You could watch the rotation of the shot, and it really was and it was something that they identified with. It if you go back and talk to ABA players, they truly did have a stake in the league and its success. And the play evolved over time. It took a while to develop the skill level, but by the end, they had some of the more dominant players in basketball at that time.
Now, one of the things that the ABA did, as opposed to the NBA, because the NBA took its players almost exclusively from the college ranks, from universities. That's where almost all of them were drafted, almost down to the last man. Whereas the ABA, of course, they took university players as well, but they also started to pick up some players that, almost literally off the playground, at least a few of them. I'm thinking guys like a Fly Williams, who played, I think it was for St. Louis, some guys.
But he played college. He played college ball though. He played
at
Tennessee at Austin Peay.
Austin Peay, that's right. He did like 2 years at Austin Peay before he got drafted.
Yeah.
But they were taking guys with either not a lot of college experience or kind of had more of a what you call like a flair, more of like a playground flair to their game as opposed to more regimented university style ball.
Well, for the ABA, so the argument. Let's go back to 1967 when the ABA started. Now, what the NBA argued was, look, there's not enough talent to stock a second league. I mean, there just isn't. They would argue.
Yeah.
And guys like Mike and say, no, that's nutty. Yeah, the players have never been better. There are all these skilled players, and we shouldn't just restrict pro basketball to, there were nine NBA teams at that time. And so what the ABA had to do, obviously, is get those players. One of the arguments that Mikan made is that, the talent is so great now, like the American Football League, we don't have to sign the top collegiate stars, but what we can do is find players who have potential, get them into the ABA, develop them, and turn them into stars, just like the AFL did. Mm-hmm. American Football League did with some of their top players. So early on, the ABA's focus was just to get some talent in the league. Now, what's also interesting about the ABA is at that time, the NBA was hyper sensitive about gambling, because if you look back in basketball history to 1951 and the betting scandals that have kind of trickled down, it was a real setback for the popularity of college basketball and those college doubleheaders at Madison Square Garden and other venues around the country. And so the NBA didn't want to land in the same situation, and so they're pretty quick to ban players who have had any suggestion of being involved with gamblers, and so there had been roughly there were a handful of them of players who couldn't play in the NBA, and the obvious names that kind of come to mind are Connie Hawkins, Roger Brown, Doug Moe, and all of them wanted to play, and the ABA was happy to take them. And, to their benefit.
Right. Now, I want to get your thoughts on this and how the ABA strategy of taking players before they finished their 4 years of college, because the NBA at the time had a rule that they would not take a player until his class had graduated from college or 4 years removed from high school, however you want to word it. And the ABA said, hey, we'll take these guys early because this guy is talented. So what are your thoughts on the ABA strategy in doing that, and then what the NBA's response was once they recognized that the ABA was taking some really talented players a year early, 2 years early?
So that happened a couple years into the league. What's important with the ABA is it was vying with the NBA for the top collegiate players at the time, and you can go back. The first draft was in '67 with Jimmy Walker, who's a guard out of Providence, was the number one draft choice in the NBA. Earl Monroe's the second pick that year, and so the leagues competed to try to to try to get Jimmy Walker. And the idea that if the ABA could steal Walker, that's a huge deal for them and their viability and their credibility. And so they didn't get Walker. And the next year they tried to get two seniors, and that was Elvin Hayes and Wes Unseld, which was interesting because Elvin Hayes was at University of Houston, which then was an ABA city, the Houston Mavericks. Wes Unseld was at University of Louisville, which was an ABA city, the Kentucky Colonels.
Yep.
So you would think that they would have a head start on getting both of them. They got neither. So then the next year, the big player to get was Lou Alcindor, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. They didn't get him. And what I'm able to show in Balls of Confusion, what the issue was, this was the early years of agenting. So the initial agents in pro basketball got in at this point. But if you look at Unseld, Hayes, Walker, Alcindor, none of them really had agents. What they had were personal representatives. They're people who were known within their colleges, who were business people who could probably negotiate a contract. So it really wasn't in this person's interest to steer this college All-American to a league that could go under tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So they all ended up, though the ABA bid more money for Unseld, pretty much for Hayes, and for Alcindor by quite a bit. Mm-hmm. It was in the interest of these personal advisors to steer them to the NBA. So what the ABA started to realize as they started to work at that period, as they started to work with agents didn't care which league the players signed with, because the money was green in the NBA and it was green in the ABA. It was all about that deal. It was the art of the deal. And so recognizing this, the ABA, they signed their first, right after they lost Alcindor, they signed their first All-American of consequence. Now, they had signed Mel Daniels to begin with, but that's a little bit different story. And that first player to kind of save face after not getting Alcindor was a guy out of LaSalle named Larry Cannon. He's signed with the Miami Floridians. And that deal was made possible, coming full circle here, by Arnold, the agent that I mentioned before, Steve Arnold. And so after Arnold delivered Cannon to the ABA owners said, well, hey, how would you like to be our league agent? And so Arnold decided, yeah, I wouldn't mind doing that. So Arnold then, for a fee, would go out early on to the colleges while the season was still going with league contracts and offer contracts to players. And so he would get the signature, get players to sign these ABA contracts, then go back to the league, and during league meetings, teams would decide which players they were willing to take. How much? So, for example, if Arnold had signed a player for a 2-year deal for $100,000,
big money back then.
Yeah. The team would have to decide, I'll take the player. That's we think we can work with this player. We'll take that contract. Yeah. So that kind of got things churning, and so it was Steve Arnold, who said, you know what? You can sign these players earlier. You don't have to wait until they graduate from college, because, look, you don't have to have a college degree to take any job in this country. Why do you do that in sports? It makes no legal sense. Mm-hmm. Now, the reason that you had the 4-year rule in the NBA is the NBA did not want to start up the equivalent of a minor league baseball system because it's incredibly expensive. So what the NBA did Because remember, college basketball had really been at the forefront before pro basketball. You know, in the 50s, there were these double and triple headers that they were going on with these major college stars, and so what the NBA decided was, we can use the NCAA, college basketball, as our minor league and as our publicity machine. So as they develop, as the John Woodens and the Henry Ibas and so on develop these top players, and their college PR departments, athletic departments, promote them, then we just come in and sign them and bring them in, just like happened with Lou Alcindor in Milwaukee.
Yeah.
So the NBA was wed to that system because they've benefited incredibly financially and in a couple of different ways. So the NBA did not want to get rid of that system. But in a basketball war, what the younger league has to do is to take the status quo and break it down. And make it very uncomfortable for the existing league to operate. And so Steve Arnold's idea of going after underclassmen was, a punch to the solar plexus for the NBA. And it was the start of a couple of things that became really untenable for the NBA. And that's why the NBA was ready by 1970 to merge with the ABA.
Yeah. I know one of the big players, probably the biggest player the ABA ever took in that way was Dr. Julius Erving, Dr. J, taking him out of University of Massachusetts a year early, and of course he.
And you know who his agent was?
Oh, was it
Steve Arnold?
Of course it was.
We want to thank Bob Kuska for his time and sharing his love of basketball with us. You can find his book on Amazon, and we will include the link in the show description. The book is called Balls of Confusion: Pro Basketball Goes to War, 1965 to 1970. Until next time, this is Basketball History 101, part of the Sports History Network, the headquarters of Sports Yesteryear. Go to sportshistorynetwork.com to find out more about this and other sports history podcasts. If you like what you hear, please hit that subscribe button wherever you get your podcast. And check out our page on Facebook. It's called Basketball History 101 Podcast. There you will find shorter historical posts as well as comments and discussion starters on today's game. We will also announce there when new episodes come out. I want to thank my producer and editor, Jacob Loayza. Join us each week as we continue to mine the history of basketball for more great stories from the past. Take care, and see you soon.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.
At the Sports History Network, we're all about sports yesteryear, and so we're so pleased to introduce you to Row One, an online memorabilia gallery and shop that brings your sports history to life anywhere. The Row One gallery includes over 5,200 gorgeously reproduced prints of team posters, game program covers, game tickets, advertisements, and more in baseball, pro and college football, pro and college basketball, and more. And any gallery item may be printed in a variety of sizes on wood, metal, canvas, acrylic, or poster paper. And in Row One shop, check out the thousands more of unique items with the retro and historical designs dating back to 1876, including t-shirts, long sleeve shirts, phone cases, mugs, blankets, pillows, towels, and even shower curtains. Go to sportshistorynetwork.com, ROW1, for access to the full Row One catalog and for gallery prints and gift items, plus get a 15% discount off all prints on the Row One Pictorum Gallery with coupon code SHN15. Follow the link on the show notes.
Hello, sports history fans. I'm Ross from the podcast Pigskin Tales. You're about to jump into another thrilling sports history moment, but first, let's dive into today's sponsor, just in time for the holiday season. Introducing Art of Words, the brainchild of word artist Dan Duffy from Philadelphia. Dan meticulously crafts stunning images by handwriting relevant words from some of the greatest sports moments in time. These unique budget-friendly illustrations are the perfect gift, sparking cherished memories and capturing hearts. Choose from city skylines, sports, history, and musicians to find a piece for everyone. And here's the exciting part. For that sports fanatic in your life, gift them a piece of their favorite team or player's history. Art of Words tells a compelling story. Explore collegiate stadiums, each meticulously crafted with every football victory etched into words. Or venture into baseball stadiums, handwritten with every player from the team's illustrious history. My favorite on the site is Bryce Harper 2021 MVP year. Because I'm a big stats guy, I think that's one of the coolest things ever. Check it out. Don't wait. Order a print today for yourself and your loved one this holiday season. Transform your wall into a gallery of captivating art and surprise your family and friends with a print of their own. Use code SHN15 at artofwords.com for a 15% discount on your order in November and December. Visit Art of Words, where words magically transform into stunning art, evoking cherished memories and touching the hearts of those who you care about. Again, use the code SHN15 for 15% off at artofwords.com.